The betting started before Corporal Thorne finished his mashed potatoes. "Fresh meat at table 7, he muttered to his companion, nodding toward the lone woman sitting 3 tables away. $20, says she washes out before the month's over. The other recruit, Private Kellerman, laughed and shook his head while cutting his steak. "Make it 30. Look at her, just sitting there all quiet and proper." Petty Officer Second Class Raven Castellanos continued eating her dinner, aware of every word despite the distance. 5 years of operations in hostile territory had sharpened her hearing beyond normal limits, and mess hall conversations carried further than most people realized. She kept her movements deliberate and calm, fork moving from plate to mouth with mechanical precision, while her peripheral vision tracked the growing interest from surrounding tables. The Naval Station Meridian Mess Hall buzzed with its usual evening energy. Fluorescent lights reflected off polished metal serving stations, while the aroma of roasted chicken and fresh bread filled the air. Conversations echoed off concrete walls painted institutional beige, creating a constant hum that provided perfect cover for the kind of whispered assessments happening at Table 4. "She's got that deer-in-headlights look," Corporal Vance observed, leaning back in his metal chair until it creaked under his weight. "Probably never been away from Mommy and Daddy before." His 4 companions nodded in agreement, their confidence building with each shared observation. They'd been watching her for 20 minutes, cataloging every detail that confirmed their assumptions about the slight woman in standard Navy utilities. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you've seen similar situations in military communities near you. Raven finished her green beans methodically, each movement economical and purposeful. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her uniform bore no visible rank insignia that might give these recruits pause. To them, she appeared exactly as intended, another new arrival trying to find her place in the complex hierarchy of military life. The irony wasn't lost on her that anonymity had become both her greatest asset and her most frequent burden. Lance Corporal Barnes pointed his fork in her direction while addressing his table. $10, says she requests a transfer within 2 weeks. But she's never even held a real weapon before today. The others murmured agreement, their voices carrying just enough to ensure she'd hear every dismissive word. They wanted her to know she was being evaluated and found lacking. The mess hall's evening rush was beginning to thin, leaving more empty tables between occupied ones and making conversations more audible. Raven noted the tactical disadvantage of her current position, back to the main walkway with only one clear exit route. Old habits from countless hostile environments made such assessments automatic, even in supposedly safe spaces like base dining facilities. "She's probably some admiral's daughter getting the princess treatment," Private Kellerman added, his voice growing bolder as his companions encouraged the commentary. "Daddy probably pulled strings to get her stationed somewhere nice and easy." The group's laughter echoed off the walls, drawing glances from nearby tables who either joined the amusement or looked away uncomfortably. Raven's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. She'd heard variations of these assumptions countless times throughout her career, each instance a reminder that her appearance triggered predictable responses from those who measure capability by superficial characteristics. Her service record included operations these recruits couldn't imagine, but that knowledge remained classified and irrelevant to their current assessment. The 5-minute Table 4 had settled into a rhythm of increasingly bold observations, each comment designed to establish their superior status while undermining hers. Their body language spoke of growing confidence, shoulders straightening and voices rising as they fed off each other's energy. They were working themselves toward action, and Raven recognized a pattern from dozens of similar encounters in various contexts. She lifted her water glass and drank slowly, using the moment to scan the room's occupants and exits one final time. 37 other diners remained scattered across the facility, most focused on their own meals and conversations. The serving staff continued their routine cleanup, oblivious to the brewing tension. In 2 minutes, she would finish eating and attempt to leave peacefully. Corporal Thorne pushed back from his table with deliberate slowness, the metal chair legs scraping against polished concrete. His eyes never left Raven's table as he stood and stretched, making a show of his 6-foot frame and broad shoulders. "Look at her pretending not to notice us," he said to his companions, voice pitched perfectly to Carrie. "Probably thinks if she ignores us, we'll just disappear." Private Kellerman followed suit, rising from his seat with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to physical intimidation working in his favor. "She's got that whole innocent act down perfect," he observed, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. "But she's never even been in a real fight before." His comment drew chuckles from their group and nervous glances from nearby diners who sensed the shift in atmosphere. Raven continued eating with mechanical precision, her fork moving from plate to mouth in steady rhythm, while her situational awareness expanded to include every movement in her peripheral vision. The approaching confrontation was no longer a possibility, but an inevitability, and she began making final tactical assessments. 5 opponents, all appearing to be standard infantry training, overconfident and likely inexperienced in actual combat situations. Lance Corporal Barnes cracked his knuckles loudly, the sound echoing across the mess hall like gunshots. "Think we should go introduce ourselves," he suggested with mock courtesy. "Make sure our new friend feels welcome here." The suggestion was met with immediate agreement from his companions, who began gathering around him with the predatory focus of pack animals preparing to establish dominance. The mess hall's ambient noise level dropped noticeably as other diners became aware of the brewing confrontation. Conversations quieted and silverware clinked less frequently as people tried to listen without appearing to stare. Staff Sergeant Morrison at table 12 looked up from his meal with the expression of someone debating whether to intervene, while Petty Officer Brooks, near the serving line, deliberately avoided making eye contact with anyone involved. Corporal Vance stretched his arms above his head, displaying the muscular build that came from dedicated weight training and competitive athletics. "She looks like she weighs about 90 pounds soaking wet," he announced to his group. "Probably get blown over by a strong breeze." His assessment triggered another round of laughter that carried across the increasingly quiet dining facility. Raven finished her last bite of chicken and set her fork down with careful precision. Her water glass was still half full, providing a reason to remain seated for another 30 seconds while she completed her preparation. The approaching group had moved from their original table and now stood in loose formation near the serving line, blocking the most direct route to the main exit. Private Kellerman took the first step toward her table, his boots clicking against the polished floor with military precision. His 4 companions fell in a step behind him, their formation unconsciously shifting into the intimidation pattern they'd learned from countless similar encounters. They moved with the confidence of young men who'd never faced serious resistance and expected none now. The fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across their faces as they approached, emphasizing the predatory expressions they wore like masks. Thorne's hands swung loosely at his sides, fingers flexing in preparation for whatever physical contact might develop. Barnes kept his shoulders squared and chest out, using his full height to maximum psychological advantage. "Hey there, sweetheart," Corporal Thorne called out when they reached speaking distance. "Mind if we join you for a minute?" His tone carried the false friendliness that barely concealed underlying aggression, and his phrasing made clear the request was purely rhetorical. The other 4 spread out slightly, unconsciously forming a semicircle that limited her movement options. Raven looked up from her tray for the first time since they'd begun their approach, her dark eyes meeting Thorne's gaze with steady calm. Her expression revealed nothing beyond polite attention, giving no indication of the rapid tactical calculations occurring behind her composed exterior. She noted each man's positioning, approximate weight and reach, dominant hand preferences, and most likely attack patterns. "We were just talking about how we haven't seen you around before," Private Kellerman added, stepping closer to her table. "New to the base, right?" His question carried the implication that her newness made her somehow inferior or vulnerable, part of the psychological pressure they were applying to establish their dominant position in this encounter. The mess hall had grown noticeably quieter, with dozens of pairs of eyes now focused on the developing confrontation. Some diners continued eating while watching covertly, while others had abandoned their meals entirely to observe. The serving staff had slowed their cleanup routine, sensing the tension but uncertain whether intervention was warranted or wise. Lance Corporal Barnes moved to her left side, completing the encirclement they'd been forming. "Hope you're finding everything to your liking here," he said with exaggerated courtesy. "Sometimes new people need a little guidance about how things work around here." His words carried clear implications about hierarchy and the consequences of not conforming to established social orders. Raven's right hand remained relaxed on the table beside her water glass, while her left rested naturally in her lap. To observers, she appeared completely at ease despite being surrounded by 5 larger opponents who clearly intended intimidation. Her breathing remained steady and controlled, showing no signs of the fear or anxiety they expected to provoke. Corporal Vance moved directly behind Raven's chair, close enough that she could feel his presence like a physical weight. His shadow fell across her tray as he leaned forward, hands gripping the back of her seat. "You know, sweetheart," he said with manufactured concern, "this isn't really the kind of place for delicate flowers. Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the office buildings where the paperwork gets done." The insult hit its mark among his companions, who chuckled appreciatively at the suggestion that she belonged in administrative roles rather than real military service. Private Kellerman nodded in agreement, his bulk positioned to block her view of the main exit. "Yeah, lots of nice desk jobs available for someone with your particular skill set," he added, emphasizing the words to make clear his assessment of her capabilities. Raven's peripheral vision tracked each movement as the circle of intimidation tightened around her position. Vance's hands on her chair back represented a clear escalation, moving from verbal harassment into physical positioning that violated personal space. Her tactical assessment updated automatically, noting that any sudden movement from her current position would trigger immediate physical contact. Lance Corporal Barnes stepped closer to the table, his thigh now touching the metal edge as he leaned down toward her eye level. "The thing is," he said with false sincerity, "some people just aren't cut out for the real military life. Nothing wrong with that, of course. Just means maybe you should consider other options before things get too difficult for you to handle." The mess hall had fallen into an uncomfortable hush, with only the distant clatter of kitchen equipment and muffled conversations from the far side of the facility breaking the tension. Staff Sergeant Morrison had stopped eating entirely, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth as he watched the confrontation develop. 2 tables away, Petty Officer Brooks shifted nervously in her seat, clearly debating whether intervention was appropriate or would only escalate the situation. Corporal Thorne moved to Raven's right side, completing the tactical encirclement his team had been forming. His hand came to rest on the table just inches from her water glass, fingers drumming against the metal surface with deliberate intimidation. "We're just trying to be helpful here," he said with mock gentleness. "Give you some friendly advice before you find yourself in over your head." The physical positioning had become overtly threatening, with 5 larger opponents now surrounding her completely and blocking all obvious escape routes. Vance's grip on her chair had tightened, and his breathing had grown more pronounced as adrenaline fueled his aggression. The group's confidence had reached its peak, fed by her apparent passivity and their successful intimidation of the surrounding witnesses. Private Kellerman leaned forward until his face was only 2 feet from hers, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath and see the small scar above his left eyebrow. "See, the problem with people like you," he said with growing boldness, "is that you think you can just waltz in here and get the same treatment as people who've actually earned their place." His words carried the full weight of his assumptions about her background and qualifications. Raven finally spoke, her voice carrying across the silent mess hall with crystal clarity. "Gentlemen," she said calmly, "I'm going to give you one opportunity to step away from this table and return to your seats." Her tone held no anger or fear, just the measured cadence of someone stating simple facts. "The suggestion you've made about my qualifications is incorrect, and this situation doesn't need to escalate further. The 5 recruits exchanged glances of amazement and amusement at her response. Thorne actually laughed out loud, a harsh sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Oh, really?" he said with exaggerated surprise. "And what exactly are you going to do if we don't take your generous offer, princess?" His question drew immediate support from his companions, who clearly viewed her warning as evidence of desperation rather than genuine threat. Lance Corporal Barnes straightened to his full height, using his 6-foot frame to maximum psychological advantage. "I think our new friend here might be a little confused about how things work," he announced his team. "Maybe she needs a more detailed explanation about the hierarchy around here." His suggestion was met with nods and murmurs of agreement from the others. Corporal Vance's hands tightened on her chair back, and he began to rock it slightly, a juvenile intimidation tactic designed to demonstrate his physical control over her position. "That's real cute, sweetheart," he said in response to her warning. "But I don't think you're really in a position to be making demands right now." His companions laughed at the observation, their confidence now completely unchecked. The mess hall had become a theater, with every remaining diner now focused entirely on the confrontation playing out at table 7. Some watched with obvious concern, while others seemed to view the scene as entertainment. The serving staff had stopped their work entirely, uncertain whether to call security or simply wait for the situation to resolve itself naturally. Raven's hands remained perfectly still on the table, showing no signs of the nervous energy or defensive posturing the recruits expected to see. Her breathing stayed controlled, and even despite being surrounded by 5 opponents who clearly intended to escalate their harassment into something more physical, the calm in her dark eyes never wavered, even as the threats became more explicit and personal. Private Kellerman reached toward her tray as if to move it aside, his action representing the first direct attempt to physically manipulate her possessions. "That's when you know it's time to leave, honey," he said with manufactured concern, "when the big boys are ready to use the table for important conversations." His hand moved closer to her water glass, clearly intending to establish dominance through casual violation of her personal space and property. Private Kellerman's hand closed around Raven's water glass, his fingers wrapping around the plastic tumbler with deliberate possession. "Time's up, princess," he announced with theatrical authority. "Big boy table time." His intention was clear as he began to lift the glass from the table, establishing physical dominance through casual theft of her property, while his 4 companions watched with anticipatory grins. The moment crystallized with perfect clarity in Raven's tactical assessment. Kellerman's reach across the table had put him in the most vulnerable position, overextended and off balance. Vance behind her chair had grown overconfident, his grip loosened as he focused on the entertainment. Thorne and Barnes flanked her sides at conversation distance, while the circle they'd formed created the illusion of control while actually limiting their own mobility. Raven's voice cut through the mess hall silence with surgical precision. "Last chance," she said without moving a muscle. "Step away now or face the consequences of your choice." Her tone carried no emotion, no pleading, just the flat certainty of someone stating immutable facts. The warning held the same weight as gravity or mathematics, natural law rather than negotiable request. Corporal Thorne burst into laughter at her response, slapping Barnes on the shoulder in shared amusement. "Did you hear that, boys?" he called out loud enough for the entire mess hall to witness. "Our little desk jockey here is threatening us." His mockery drew immediate support from his companions, who clearly viewed her continued calm as evidence of naive bravado rather than genuine capability. The surrounding diners held their collective breath as the confrontation reached its breaking point. Staff Sergeant Morrison had half risen from his seat, torn between intervening and allowing the situation to play out naturally. Petty Officer Brooks gripped her coffee cup with white knuckles, her expression torn between concern and fascination at the drama unfolding before the entire dining facility. Lance Corporal Barnes leaned closer to Raven's eye level, bringing his face within 18 inches of hers. "And exactly what consequences might those be "Sweetheart," he asked with exaggerated curiosity, "you gonna file a complaint with the base commander? Maybe call your daddy to come rescue you?" His suggestions triggered another round of laughter from his team, who clearly found the idea of her fighting back absurd. Kellerman tightened his grip on the water glass and began to pull it away from the table with exaggerated slowness, savoring what he perceived as his moment of triumph. "Thank for the drink, honey," he said with mock gratitude. "Consider it payment for the valuable lesson you're about to learn about military hierarchy." His movement represented the final line being crossed, theft following intimidation in the escalating pattern of harassment. Corporal Vance decided to add his own physical dominance to the moment, placing both hands firmly on Raven's shoulders from behind. "Yeah, time for little girls to learn their place around here," he announced while applying pressure intended to force her to remain seated. His grip was firm enough to restrict her movement, but not quite painful, maintaining the pretense that this was guidance rather than assault. The mess hall had become completely silent except for the distant hum of refrigeration units and the barely audible breathing of dozens of witnesses. Every eye was focused on Table 7, where 5 large men had surrounded one small woman in what appeared to be a demonstration of inevitable male dominance. The scene felt scripted, predictable, following patterns that most observers had witnessed countless times in various forms. Raven's hands remained perfectly still on the table's surface, her breathing unchanged despite having her shoulders gripped from behind and her property being stolen in front of her. Her dark eyes showed no fear, no anger, no pleading for mercy or intervention. Instead, they held the same calm focus of a surgeon preparing to make the first incision, professional assessment, replacing emotional response. The tactical situation had evolved exactly as she'd predicted. Kellerman was overextended across the table with her glass in his right hand, his balance compromised and dominant arm occupied. Vance behind her had committed both hands to restraining her shoulders, leaving himself vulnerable and unable to react quickly. Thorne and Barnes flanked her at optimal striking distance, while their formation prevented mutual support. Time seemed suspended as Kellerman completed his theft of the water glass, holding it up like a trophy while grinning at his companions. "See how easy that was," he announced to his team. "Sometimes you just have to show people where they stand in the real world." His declaration was met with nods and murmurs of approval from the others, who viewed the successful intimidation as confirmation of their superior status. Private Barnes reached toward Raven's food tray with casual arrogance, clearly intending to continue the pattern of property violation that Kellerman had established. "Probably done eating anyway," he said with manufacturer concern. "Wouldn't want you to get sick from too much excitement." His hand moved toward her plate with the same deliberate slowness Kellerman had used, savoring the psychological dominance. The fluorescent lights reflected off the water in Kellerman's stolen glass as he raised it in mock salute to his companions. "Here's to teaching valuable lessons," he declared with theatrical pomposity. "May our new friend here remember this moment the next time she thinks about sitting at the grown-ups table." His toast drew chuckles and murmurs of agreement from his team. Corporal Vance increased the pressure on Raven's shoulders, leaning down until his mouth was near her ear. "Hope you learned something useful today, Princess," he whispered with false intimacy. "Next time maybe you'll think twice before pretending to be something you're not." His words carried the satisfaction of someone who believed the lesson had been successfully delivered through superior force and intimidation. Raven's response came with the sudden explosive violence of a controlled detonation. Her left hand shot upward like a striking snake, fingers extended and rigid as they drove into the soft tissue just below Kellerman's sternum with surgical precision. The strike hit Kellerman's solar plexus with the precision of a surgical instrument, instantly paralyzing his diaphragm and dropping him to his knees as the stolen water glass shattered on the concrete floor. His eyes went wide with shock and pain as his body struggled to remember how to breathe, both hands clutching his chest while he gasped soundlessly like a landed fish. Before Vance could process what had happened behind him, Raven's right elbow drove backward into his ribs with devastating accuracy, targeting the floating ribs that provided no muscular protection. The impact produced an audible crack that echoed across the silent mess hall as Vance's grip on her shoulders instantly released, his body doubling over in agony while he stumbled backward into an empty chair. Raven flowed upward from her seated position with liquid grace, her movement so smooth it appeared effortless despite the explosive violence she just unleashed. Her left hand caught Thorne's reaching wrist as he attempted to grab her arm, twisting it in a direction joints weren't designed to bend, while her right palm struck his elbow with enough force to hyperextend the joint beyond its natural limits. Thorne's scream cut through the mess hall silence as ligaments stretched past their breaking point, his knees buckling as Raven maintained control of his compromised arm. She used his falling weight against him, guiding his descent while applying pressure that kept him helpless and prevented any attempt to recover his balance or fighting capability. Lance Corporal Barnes lunged forward from her left side, his training finally overriding his shock enough to attempt intervention. His reaching hands found only empty air as Raven sidestepped with minimal movement, her right leg sweeping his forward ankle while her left hand pushed his shoulder in the same direction his momentum was already carrying him. Barnes hit the concrete floor face first with a wet smack that made witnesses wince in sympathetic pain. His nose erupted in blood as it struck the polished surface, and his attempts to push himself upright were hampered by the disorientation that comes from unexpected head trauma. He rolled onto his side, one hand pressed to his streaming nose while the other tried to clear his vision. The entire sequence had lasted less than 10 seconds, transforming 5 confident aggressors into a collection of injured men scattered around table 7 like broken toys. Kellerman remained on his knees, still struggling to draw breath while tears streamed down his face from the pain in his chest. Vance sat slumped against an overturned chair, both arms wrapped around his damaged ribs, as he tried to manage the agony of what felt like broken bones. Corporal Vance attempted to rise from his position behind the overturned chair, his face twisted with rage and pain as adrenaline temporarily overcame his injured ribs. "You crazy bitch," he snarled through gritted teeth, his hands forming fists despite the obvious damage to his torso. "I'm going to tear you apart for that." His threat carried less conviction than intended, weakened by his labored breathing and unsteady posture. Raven turned toward him with the predatory focus of an apex predator identifying its next target. Her movement was economical and purposeful, showing no signs of exertion despite having just neutralized 4 opponents in rapid succession. Her dark eyes held the cold calculation of someone evaluating tactical options rather than emotional reactions to his verbal threat. The mess hall had erupted in chaos as witnesses processed what they'd just observed. Staff Sergeant Morrison was on his feet, but frozen in place, his mouth hanging open as he tried to reconcile the small woman with the devastating combat skills she'd just displayed. Petty Officer Brooks had dropped her coffee cup, the brown liquid spreading across her table, while she stared in amazement at the transformed battlefield. Other diners pushed back from their tables or stood up entirely, creating distance from the violence while maintaining visual contact with the incredible scene unfolding before them. Conversations exploded in whispered bursts as people tried to process what they'd witnessed, their voices carrying fragments of disbelief and speculation about the woman's true identity and training background. Vance took an unsteady step toward Raven, his injured ribs screaming in protest, but his masculine pride demanding some form of retaliation for the humiliation he'd suffered. His movement was slow and telegraphed, compromised by pain and the awkward way he was forced to hold his damaged torso. Every step brought visible discomfort that undermined his attempts at intimidation. Raven waited until he committed to his approach before moving with the same explosive speed she'd demonstrated throughout the encounter. Her left hand caught his extended right arm, while her right leg swept behind his ankles, using his forward momentum to accelerate his inevitable fall while maintaining complete control of his descent. Vance hit the floor with enough force to drive the air from his already damaged lungs. his back arching as new waves of pain shot through his injured ribs. The impact left him gasping and helpless, unable to mount any further resistance, while Raven stood over him with the casual dominance of someone who had never been in any real danger during the entire confrontation. The silence that followed was profound and complete, broken only by the labored breathing of 5 defeated men and the distant hum of kitchen equipment. Kellerman had finally managed to draw a shaky breath, but remained on his knees, too weakened and shocked to attempt standing. Barnes continued to bleed from his broken nose while struggling to focus his concussion-addled vision on the woman who had destroyed their entire group. Thorne cradled his hyperextended arm against his chest, his face pale with pain and shock as he tried to process how quickly his confident harassment had transformed into complete defeat. The joint damage would require medical attention, and the humiliation of being neutralized so effortlessly by someone he dismissed as harmless would linger far longer than the physical injury. Raven straightened her uniform with calm precision, smoothing wrinkles that had appeared during the brief but intense physical confrontation. Her breathing remained controlled and even, showing no signs of the exertion that should have accompanied such explosive violence. She looked down at the 5 injured men scattered around her position with the same professional assessment a mechanic might give to a completed repair job. The mess hall remained suspended in absolute silence as Raven collected her tray from the table with the same methodical precision she'd used throughout her meal. Her movements were unhurried and deliberate, showing complete disregard for the 5 injured men scattered around her feet, like the aftermath of a natural disaster. She stacked her empty plates with military efficiency while stepping carefully around Kellerman's kneeling form. Private Kellerman finally managed to draw a full breath, the desperate gasping replaced by shaky inhalations that spoke of slowly returning respiratory function. His face remained flushed and tear-streaked from the solar plexus strike that had instantly neutralized his ability to breathe, and his wide eyes tracked Raven's every movement with newfound respect and terror. Corporal Vance attempted to push himself into a sitting position against the overturned chair, his face contorted with pain as his damaged ribs protested every movement. The audible crack they'd all heard during Raven's elbow strike suggested fractures that would require immediate medical attention. Yet his masculine pride kept him trying to appear functional despite his obvious injuries. Lance Corporal Barnes had managed to sit up, but remained on the floor, one hand pressed firmly against his broken nose to stem the steady flow of blood, while the other explored his face for additional damage. His eyes were watering from the impact with the concrete, and his attempts to focus on Raven revealed the disorientation that accompanied his head trauma. Thorne remained exactly where Raven had left him, cradling his hyperextended arm against his chest while his face had gone pale with shock and pain. The joint manipulation she'd performed was a textbook demonstration of applied anatomy, using precise leverage to disable his limb without permanent damage while ensuring he'd remember the lesson for months to come. The surrounding witnesses had formed an irregular circle around the scene, drawn by morbid fascination, yet maintaining respectful distance from the woman who just demonstrated capabilities that defied every assumption they'd made about her. Staff Sergeant Morrison stood with his hands hanging uselessly at his sides, his military experience providing no framework for processing what he'd observed. Petty Officer Brooks had retrieved her dropped coffee cup, but held it forgotten in her hands while staring at Raven with the expression of someone witnessing a fundamental shift in their understanding of reality. The casual efficiency with which the small woman had dismantled 5 larger opponents challenged every preconception about combat capability and gender dynamics. 2 corporals from Table 9 had abandoned their dinner entirely, standing with their trays forgotten while they exchanged whispered observations about the incredible display of fighting skills they'd just witnessed. Their voices carried fragments of speculation about specialized training and classified operations, theories attempting to explain the impossible scene playing out before them. Raven finished organizing her tray and lifted it from the table with the same calm movements she'd used throughout the encounter. Her uniform showed no signs of the brief, but intense physical confrontation beyond minor wrinkles that could have resulted from normal activity. Her hair remained properly arranged in regulation style, and her breathing never indicated the exertion that should have accompanied such explosive violence. Kellerman struggled to find his voice, managing only a hoarse whisper when he finally spoke. "What the hell are you?" he croaked, his damaged throat making speech difficult while his eyes remained fixed on her face with newfound wariness. The question hung in the silent air like smoke, expressing what every witness was thinking but afraid to ask directly. Raven looked down at him with the expression of a teacher addressing a particularly slow student. "Petty Officer, Second Class Raven Castellanos," she said with calm precision. "United States Navy." Her response provided the basic information he'd requested, while revealing nothing about the specialized training that had made their defeat inevitable from the moment they'd chosen confrontation. The formal introduction sent ripples of recognition through the assembled witnesses, though most remained uncertain about the implications of her rank and service branch. Military hierarchy was complex, and the relationship between Navy personnel and Marine Corps recruits involved protocols that weren't immediately clear to everyone present in the dining facility. Vance attempted to inject defiance into his voice despite his compromised position on the floor. "That doesn't explain how you fight like some kind of special forces operator," he managed through gritted teeth. His accusation carried the weight of someone beginning to understand that their target had been far more dangerous than anyone could have anticipated. The silence stretched as Raven considered her response, weighing operational security requirements against the educational value of providing these men with enough information to prevent future incidents. Her decision appeared to involve classified considerations that weren't immediately apparent to civilian or standard military observers watching the exchange. Barnes finally managed to stem the bleeding from his broken nose enough to speak, though his voice was distorted by swelling and damage. "You're not regular Navy," he said with growing certainty. "Nobody learns to fight like that in basic training." His observation was met with murmurs of agreement from surrounding witnesses who'd reached similar conclusions. Raven's expression remained neutral as she balanced her tray in one hand while surveying the injured man at her feet. The educational moment they were experiencing would likely prevent similar incidents in the future, but revealing specific details about her training background involved security protocols that extended beyond this dining facility. Staff Sergeant Morrison finally found his voice, stepping forward with the authority of someone accustomed to managing complex situations involving military personnel from different branches. "Ma'am," he said with obvious respect, "I think these men would benefit from understanding exactly what kind of mistake they just made." His suggestion carried the weight of someone seeking clarification for administrative rather than curious purposes. The mess hall's attention focused entirely on Raven as she considered Morrison's request, weighing disclosure against security while surrounded by dozens of witnesses who'd just observed capabilities that clearly exceeded standard military training. Her decision would determine whether the incident concluded with mystery or provided the educational closure that might prevent future confrontations. Thorne managed to speak despite his pain, his voice carrying a note of desperate need to understand how completely they'd misjudged their target. "Please," he said with obvious humility, "we need to know what we walked into here." His plea represented the collective desire of everyone present to comprehend the extraordinary combat demonstration they'd witnessed. The mess hall doors burst open with military precision as Master Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez entered the dining facility, his weathered face scanning the scene with the practiced eye of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. His presence commanded immediate attention, and conversations died as personnel recognized the authority that came with his rank and bearing. Rodriguez's gaze swept across the scattered injured men before settling on Raven, who remained standing calmly beside her table with her tray balanced in one hand. His expression shifted from concern to recognition, and he straightened to attention with the automatic response of someone encountering a superior they hadn't expected to find in this context. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said with obvious respect, his voice carrying across the silent mess hall. "I wasn't aware you were stationed at Meridian." His formal acknowledgment sent immediate ripples through the assembled witnesses, who began to understand that the woman they'd watched demolish 5 opponents held position and authority beyond their initial assumptions. Raven nodded slightly in response to Rodriguez's greeting, her expression remaining professionally neutral while she assessed the crowd of witnesses surrounding the scene. "Temporary assignment, Master Chief," she replied with calm precision. "I'm here for specialized training evaluation with the Maritime Special Operations Command." Her explanation provided just enough information to satisfy curiosity while maintaining operational security. The revelation hit the assembled personnel like a physical blow, with gasps and whispered exclamations rippling through the crowd as they processed the implications of her statement. Maritime Special Operations Command meant Navy SEALs, and the woman they'd watched casually neutralize 5 opponents was clearly operating at levels of training and capability they'd never encountered. Kellerman remained kneeling on the floor, his face cycling through expressions of shock, fear, and dawning comprehension as he realized the magnitude of their miscalculation. "Holy shit," he whispered, his voice barely audible but carrying clearly in the absolute silence. "We tried to intimidate a fucking SEAL." His profanity expressed what everyone was thinking but afraid to articulate. Staff Sergeant Morrison stepped forward with obvious nervousness, his earlier confidence replaced by the careful deference due to someone whose capabilities had just been demonstrated beyond any doubt. "Ma'am," he said with formal respect, these men clearly didn't understand who they were dealing with. "On behalf of the base personnel, I apologize for this incident." Vance struggled to process the information while still cradling his damaged ribs against the overturned chair. His face had gone white as the reality of their situation became clear, understanding that they'd not only assaulted a superior officer, but one whose training made their defeat inevitable from the moment they'd approach her table. Rodriguez surveyed the injured men with the expression of someone calculating administrative consequences and medical requirements. "Gentlemen," he said with the authority of decades in special operations, "you have just learned one of the most expensive lessons of your military careers. Consider yourselves fortunate that Petty Officer Castellanos chose to use restraint in her response." The Master Chief's words carried implications that sent visible shivers through the assembled witnesses, suggesting that what they'd observed represented controlled demonstration rather than full capability deployment. Barnes touched his broken nose gingerly, while contemplating how much worse their situation could have become if Raven had chosen to escalate rather than educate. Petty Officer Brooks approached cautiously, her earlier shock replaced by professional curiosity about encountering someone whose service record clearly included operations beyond standard military experience. "Ma'am," she said with obvious respect, "would it be appropriate to ask about your operational background, or is that information classified above our clearance levels?" Raven considered the question while balancing disclosure against security protocols, understanding that some level of explanation would prevent future incidents while maintaining the boundaries required by her actual assignments. "My service record includes multiple deployments with SEAL Team 7, she said carefully. "The details of those operations remain classified, but my presence here involves training evaluation for advanced maritime operations." The explanation satisfied the immediate curiosity while establishing clear boundaries about information that wouldn't be shared regardless of rank or clearance levels. The assembled personnel absorbed this confirmation of their suspicions with visible awe and newfound respect for someone whose capabilities clearly exceeded anything in their previous experience. Thorne attempted to stand while still protecting his hyperextended arm, his movements slow and careful as pain reminded him of the precise joint manipulation Raven had performed. "Ma'am," he said with obvious humility, "we had no idea who you were or what your background involved. Our behavior was completely inappropriate regardless, but understanding your actual position makes our actions even more inexcusable." Rodriguez nodded approvingly at Thorne's acknowledgement while maintaining his professional assessment of the administrative situation they now faced. The incident would require documentation and medical evaluation for all involved parties, but the educational value appeared to outweigh the potential for formal disciplinary action if handled appropriately. The mess hall had become an impromptu classroom where assumptions about gender, capability, and military hierarchy had been challenged and corrected through direct demonstration. The lesson would spread throughout the base within hours, carried by witnesses who'd observed firsthand the consequences of underestimating personnel based on appearance rather than training and service record. Kellerman finally managed to stand, his legs still shaky from the solar plexus strike that had initiated his education about the realities of special operations training. "Ma'am," he said with obvious contrition, "I want to formally apologize for our behavior and express gratitude that you chose to teach rather than destroy us. We'll carry this lesson for the rest of our careers." Raven's expression softened slightly as she recognized the genuine remorse and learning that had emerged from the confrontation. Education through demonstration was often more effective than formal instruction, and these men would never again make assumptions about capability based on superficial characteristics or apparent vulnerability. The incident was concluding with the kind of mutual respect and understanding that transformed conflict into education, though the physical consequences would serve as permanent reminders of the lesson learned. Rodriguez began organizing medical attention for the injured while Raven prepared to continue with her original mission at the base. Word spread through Naval Station Meridian with the velocity of wildfire in dry timber, carried by witnesses who'd observed the impossible becoming reality in the span of 30 seconds. Within an hour, personnel throughout the base were discussing the mess hall incident in hushed conversations that mixed awe, disbelief, and newfound respect for assumptions that had been shattered beyond repair. Lieutenant Commander Hayes paused his evening briefing when his aide whispered the preliminary report about the dining facility confrontation. His eyebrows rose as he processed the information about 5 injured recruits and 1 unharmed Navy SEAL who'd been operating under deep cover for training evaluation purposes. The implications extended far beyond simple disciplinary action. In the base medical facility, Corpsman Torres finished setting Thorne's hyperextended elbow while listening to his patient's stammered account of the encounter. The joint manipulation had been performed with surgical precision, causing maximum temporary disability while avoiding permanent damage. The technique spoke of training that went far beyond standard military combat instruction. Barnes sat on an adjacent examination table while Torres cleaned and bandaged his broken nose, the swelling already beginning to distort his features as tissue responded to the concrete impact. His concussion symptoms were mild but present, requiring observation and limiting his duty status until full recovery could be confirmed through proper medical protocols. Vance's chest x-rays revealed 2 cracked ribs that would heal naturally with proper rest and pain management, though the precise targeting of his floating ribs suggested his attacker possessed detailed anatomical knowledge combined with practical application experience. The injury would serve as a painful reminder for several weeks, while bone tissue slowly repaired itself. Kellerman's solar plexus remained tender and sensitive, though no permanent damage had resulted from the strike that had instantly paralyzed his breathing. The technique demonstrated precise knowledge of human physiology and pressure points, applied with enough force to incapacitate without causing lasting harm to vital organs or structures. Chief Petty Officer Martinez entered the medical facility to check on the injured personnel, his expression mixing concern with professional curiosity about the incident that had already become legendary throughout the base. "Gentlemen," he said while reviewing their medical charts, "you've just received one of the most expensive educations in military history. Consider yourselves fortunate to be walking away from this encounter." The 5 men exchanged glances that reflected their growing understanding of how completely they'd misjudged their target and the potential consequences of their harassment campaign. Each injury served as a physical reminder of capabilities they'd never imagined, administered by someone who'd chosen restraint over retaliation despite their aggressive provocation. In the Base Communications Center, Radioman First Class Johnson fielded calls from other installations requesting confirmation of the rumors spreading through military networks. The story of a female SEAL neutralizing 5 harassers in a dining facility had captured imaginations and challenged preconceptions throughout the regional command structure. Meanwhile, in the administrative offices, personnel specialist Chen updated Raven's temporary duty records to reflect her actual security clearance and operational background, ensuring that future interactions would be conducted with appropriate respect for her training and service record. The cover story that had enabled her evaluation mission was no longer necessary. Captain Morrison reviewed the incident report with growing amazement at the detailed accounts provided by multiple witnesses, each testimony confirming capabilities that exceeded normal military training by orders of magnitude. The woman's presence at his base suddenly made sense within the context of Maritime Special Operations Command evaluation protocols. Security footage from the mess hall cameras was being reviewed by intelligence specialist Davis, who documented the precise timing and techniques demonstrated during the 30-second engagement. The video evidence would become required viewing for personnel training sessions about assumptions, harassment, and the realities of special operations capabilities. In the base gymnasium, word of the incident had transformed evening workout conversations as personnel discussed the implications of underestimating colleagues based on appearance or perceived status. The lesson resonated beyond gender dynamics to encompass broader themes about respect, professionalism, and the hidden depths of military service records. Petty Officer Second Class Williams, who'd witnessed the entire confrontation from Table 12, found herself repeatedly asked to describe the incredible precision and speed she'd observed. Her accounts emphasized the calm professionalism Raven had maintained throughout the escalating harassment, right up until the moment explosive violence became necessary. The base's senior enlisted personnel held an impromptu meeting to discuss policy implications and training opportunities arising from the incident, recognizing that assumptions about capability based on demographics had created a dangerous situation that could have ended much worse for everyone involved. Master Chief Rodriguez completed his preliminary investigation by interviewing each witness separately, documenting consistent accounts of harassment, escalation, clear warnings ignored, and precision application of force that suggested extensive, specialized training in close-quarters combat and human anatomy. The injured recruits faced potential disciplinary action for harassment and assault, though the educational value of their experience might influence final administrative decisions. Their recovery periods would provide ample time to contemplate the lessons learned about respect, assumptions, and the hidden capabilities of their fellow service members. Throughout the base, the incident had become a catalyst for broader discussions about gender integration, specialized training recognition, and the importance of professional behavior regardless of perceived hierarchies or demographic assumptions. The 30-second encounter had challenged fundamental beliefs about capability and authority. Evening shift personnel arriving for duty found themselves briefed about the mess hall incident as part of standard security updates, ensuring that similar confrontations would be unlikely given the new awareness of hidden capabilities among personnel assigned to the installation for specialized training missions. The story would enter base legend within days, told and retold with increasing embellishment, but always returning to the core truth that appearances could be fatally deceiving when encountering personnel whose service records included operations beyond standard military experience. Raven Castellanos had become a permanent part of Naval Station Meridian's institutional memory. 3 days after the mess hall incident, Raven's presence at Naval Station Meridian had transformed from anonymous cover assignment to acknowledged expertise consultation. Personnel throughout the base now recognized her distinctive silhouette and moved with the respectful deference accorded to someone whose capabilities had been demonstrated beyond any doubt or argument. Captain Harrison requested a private meeting to discuss the implications of having a SEAL Team 7 operator conducting evaluation missions at his installation. The conversation revealed that Raven's assignment involved assessing base security protocols and personnel readiness for potential special operations support missions that might require future coordination. The 5 recruits who'd confronted her were completing their medical recovery while facing administrative review that would determine their continued military service eligibility. Each man carried visible reminders of their encounter, but more importantly, they become inadvertent ambassadors for the lesson that appearances could be fatally deceiving in military environments. Kellerman approached Raven during her morning physical training session, his movements still careful as his solar plexus remained tender from the precise strike she'd delivered. "Ma'am," he said with obvious respect, "I wanted to thank you for choosing education over elimination when we gave you every reason to end our careers permanently. Your restraint saved our lives and our futures." Raven acknowledged his gratitude with a slight nod while continuing her workout routine, which had drawn an audience of base personnel eager to observe training methods that clearly exceeded standard military fitness protocols. Her exercises incorporated techniques and equipment that suggested preparation for operations requiring extraordinary physical capabilities. The base's senior leadership had quietly circulated guidance about treating personnel on temporary assignment with appropriate respect regardless of apparent rank or demographic characteristics. The memo didn't reference the mess hall incident directly, but everyone understood the connection between recent events and the new emphasis on professional behavior. Master Chief Rodriguez found himself fielding inquiries from other installations whose personnel had heard rumors about the incident and wanted confirmation of the extraordinary combat demonstration that had allegedly occurred at Meridian. His responses balanced operational security requirements with the educational value of acknowledging that specialized personnel operated throughout the military system. Barnes returned to limited duty with a face that still showed evidence of his encounter with the concrete floor, serving as a walking reminder to base personnel about the consequences of underestimating colleagues based on superficial assessments. His broken nose had healed properly, but the lesson learned would influence his behavior for the remainder of his career. In the base library, personnel specialist Chun researched public information about Navy SEAL training and operations, trying to understand the background that had enabled one woman to neutralize 5 men with such casual efficiency. The available information suggested that what they'd witnessed represented only a fraction of capabilities developed through years of specialized training. The mess hall itself had become an unofficial pilgrimage site where personnel would request tables near the location of the confrontation, hoping to absorb some sense of the extraordinary event that had occurred there. Food service staff reported increased interest in the dining facility, with many visitors clearly more interested in the history than the menu. Vance completed his medical evaluation with cracked ribs that were healing properly, though the pain continued to remind him daily of the precision with which Raven had targeted his most vulnerable anatomical structures. His respect for her capabilities had evolved from fear through awe to genuine professional admiration for someone who represented the pinnacle of military training. Lieutenant Commander Hayes incorporated the incident into his leadership training sessions, using it as a case study about the importance of treating all personnel with appropriate respect and the dangers of making assumptions based on appearance or perceived status. The lesson resonated throughout the officer ranks as they considered their own potential blind spots. The base's intelligence section had compiled a comprehensive after-action report documenting the incident's timeline, witness statements, and medical outcomes for inclusion in training materials about special operations integration and personnel security awareness. The report would serve educational purposes at multiple installations throughout the command structure. Thorne's hyperextended elbow had regained most of its mobility, though the joint manipulation Raven had performed left him with permanent awareness of how easily trained personnel could disable opponents through precise application of anatomical knowledge. His physical therapy sessions provided constant reminders of the encounter's lasting consequences. Security personnel throughout the base had modified their assessment protocols to account for the possibility that individuals on temporary assignment might possess capabilities far exceeding their apparent status or rank. The lesson applied beyond gender considerations to encompass broader awareness about hidden qualifications and specialized training backgrounds. Evening briefings now included standard reminders about professional behavior and respect for all personnel, regardless of apparent position in military hierarchy or demographic characteristics. The guidance was presented as general policy rather than response to specific incidents, but everyone understood the connection to recent events. The base's training department had requested permission to develop educational materials based on the mess hall confrontation, recognizing its value for teaching lessons about assumptions, harassment prevention, and recognition of specialized capabilities among military personnel. The proposal required clearance from multiple command levels due to operational security considerations. Medical staff continued monitoring the 5 injured recruits for both physical recovery and psychological adjustment to their new understanding of capability diversity within military ranks. The incident had challenged fundamental assumptions about strength, training, and combat effectiveness that required significant mental recalibration. Raven's morning runs through the base had attracted followers who maintained respectful distance while hoping to observe training techniques that might improve their own fitness and capabilities. Her routine incorporated elements that clearly exceeded standard military physical training, suggesting preparation for operational requirements beyond normal military service. The incident had become required reading for incoming personnel orientation programs, serving as both cautionary tale and educational opportunity about the importance of professional behavior and respect for all service members regardless of appearance or assumed background. The lesson would influence base culture for years to come. Admiral Blackstone arrived at Naval Station Meridian unannounced, his presence commanding immediate attention as base personnel recognized the 4 stars adorning his dress uniform. His reputation for conducting surprise inspections preceded him, and Captain Harrison scrambled to organize proper reception protocols while wondering what had drawn such high-ranking attention to his installation. The Admiral's first stop was the base medical facility, where he personally interviewed each of the 5 recruits who'd been involved in what command reports euphemistically described as a training incident. His questions were precise and probing, designed to assess both their physical recovery and their understanding of the lessons learned from their encounter. Kellerman stood at attention despite his still tender solar plexus, his posture rigid as he recounted the events that had led to his education about Navy SEAL capabilities. "Sir," he reported with obvious contrition, "we made assumptions based on appearance that proved catastrophically incorrect. Petty Officer Castellanos demonstrated restraint and professionalism that probably saved our careers and possibly our lives." Admiral Blackstone's expression remained neutral as he reviewed medical reports documenting the precise injuries each man had sustained, noting the surgical precision with which force had been applied to achieve maximum educational impact while avoiding permanent damage. The technique suggested training that went beyond standard military combat instruction into specialized operational territories. Barnes described his broken nose and concussion with the clinical detachment of someone who'd gained profound respect for capabilities he'd never imagined possible. "Sir," the speed and precision of her response was unlike anything we'd encountered in our training. She moved like someone who'd applied these techniques in real-world situations where mistakes meant death rather than embarrassment. The Admiral's investigation continued with individual interviews of key witnesses, including Staff Sergeant Morrison and Petty Officer Brooks, whose accounts confirmed the systematic harassment that had preceded the explosive demonstration of combat capabilities. Their testimony painted a clear picture of escalating aggression met with measured response that had achieved perfect educational outcomes. Vance reported his cracked ribs, while acknowledging that the targeting had been specifically chosen to incapacitate without causing lasting damage. "Sir, she could have killed any of us within that 30-second window, but instead chose to teach lessons that will influence our behavior for the remainder of our careers." Her restraint demonstrated the kind of judgment we should have shown from the beginning. Master Chief Rodriguez briefed the Admiral on the broader implications of the incident, including its impact on base culture and the educational value it had provided for discussions about harassment, assumptions, and recognition of specialized capabilities among military personnel. The event had transformed institutional awareness in ways that formal training programs had never achieved. Admiral Blackstone's next stop was the mess hall itself, where he stood quietly at table 7 while processing witness accounts of the confrontation that had occurred there. The site had become an informal monument to the lesson that appearances could be fatally deceiving when encountering personnel whose service records included classified operations. Thorne described his hyperextended elbow with the reverence of someone who'd learned about precision joint manipulation from a master practitioner. "Sir, the technique she used was applied with enough force to disable but not destroy. Every aspect of our encounter was controlled and calculated, designed to achieve specific educational outcomes rather than simply inflict punishment." The Admiral requested a private meeting with Raven, who reported to his temporary office with the bearing of someone accustomed to briefing senior leadership about operational matters involving national security considerations. Their conversation remained classified, but observers noted the respectful deference the Admiral showed toward her expertise and service record. Captain Harrison provided administrative context about Raven's temporary assignment, explaining that her evaluation mission had been proceeding normally until the mess hall incident revealed her true capabilities to base personnel. The cover story that had enabled her assessment work was no longer viable given the widespread knowledge of her background. Intelligence reports confirmed that word the incident had spread throughout regional command structures, with multiple installations requesting confirmation of rumors about a female SEAL neutralizing 5 harassers in a dining facility. The story had captured imaginations and challenged preconceptions about capability and gender integration throughout the military system. The Admiral's final interviews focused on senior enlisted personnel who'd observed the incident's aftermath and its impact on base culture and professional behavior. Their accounts emphasized the educational value that had emerged from what could have been a purely disciplinary matter if handled through traditional administrative channels. Admiral Blackstone's departure briefing to Captain Harrison included commendation for the professional manner in which the incident had been handled and guidance about incorporating its lessons into formal training programs. The event would serve as a case study for harassment prevention and capability recognition throughout the command structure. The 5 recruits received formal counseling that emphasized their fortunate survival of an encounter that could have ended their careers and possibly their lives if they targeted someone with less restraint and professional judgment. Their recovery periods had provided time to contemplate lessons about respect, assumptions, and the hidden depths of military service records. Medical documentation confirmed that all injuries were healing properly and that no permanent damage had resulted from the precise application of force that had characterized Raven's response to their harassment. The techniques demonstrated suggested extensive training in human anatomy and pressure point manipulation for tactical applications. The incident had achieved legendary status throughout Naval Station Meridian, serving as permanent reminder that appearances could be fatally deceiving when encountering personnel whose training exceeded normal military standards. The 30-second confrontation had provided more effective education about respect and professional behavior than years of formal instruction programs. Admiral Blackstone's visit concluded with recognition that the mess hall incident had created an unexpected training opportunity that would influence military culture far beyond the boundaries of Naval Station Meridian. The lessons learned would be incorporated into leadership development and harassment prevention programs throughout the regional command structure, ensuring that similar educational opportunities would be available without requiring direct confrontation. 2 weeks after Admiral Blackstone's departure, Naval Station Meridian had settled into its new reality where assumptions about capability based on appearance had been permanently challenged. The mess hall incident had evolved from shocking confrontation to institutional legend, influencing every aspect of base culture and professional interaction protocols. Raven's evaluation mission had concluded successfully, her assessment of base security protocols and personnel readiness complete despite the unexpected revelation of her true capabilities. The cover story that had enabled her anonymous observation was no longer necessary, allowing her to operate with full recognition of her specialized training and operational background. The 5 recruits who'd initiated the confrontation had completed their medical recovery and faced administrative review that would determine their continued military service eligibility. Each man now carried himself with the humbled awareness that comes from surviving an encounter that could have ended very differently under less controlled circumstances. Captain Harrison convened a base-wide assembly to address the broader implications of recent events and establish new standards for professional behavior that reflected lessons learned from the mess hall confrontation. His speech emphasized respect for all personnel regardless of apparent rank, gender, or demographic characteristics, using the incident as a teaching moment without explicitly naming the participants. Kellerman had requested permission to personally thank Raven for the restraint she'd shown during their encounter, recognizing that her choice to educate rather than eliminate had preserved not only his physical well-being, but his military career prospects. The solar plexus strike that had initiated his education remained a vivid reminder of capabilities he'd never imagined possible. The base's training department had received approval to develop educational materials based on the incident, creating harassment prevention and capability recognition programs that would be implemented throughout the regional command structure. The 30-second confrontation would serve as a case study for years to come, teaching lessons about assumptions and professional behavior. Barnes reported for duty with a face that had healed properly from his encounter with the concrete floor, though his broken nose served as a permanent reminder of the lesson learned about underestimating colleagues based on superficial assessments. His attitude toward female personnel had undergone fundamental transformation that would influence his behavior throughout his remaining military service. Security footage from a mess hall had become required viewing for incoming personnel during their orientation briefings, providing visual demonstration of the consequences that could result from harassment and the reality that specialized capabilities might be hidden among seemingly ordinary service members assigned to the installation. Vance's cracked ribs had healed completely, leaving him with lasting appreciation for the precision with which Raven had targeted his most vulnerable anatomical structures while avoiding permanent damage. His respect for her capabilities had evolved from initial fear through awe to genuine professional admiration for someone who represented the pinnacle of military training excellence. The base gymnasium had become an informal classroom where personnel gathered to observe Raven's training routines, hoping to learn techniques that might improve their own physical capabilities and combat readiness. Her exercises incorporated elements that clearly exceeded standard military fitness protocols, suggesting preparation for operational requirements beyond normal service expectations. Master Chief Rodriguez had fielded inquiries from military installations worldwide, all seeking confirmation of rumors about the extraordinary combat demonstration that had allegedly occurred at Meridian. His responses balanced operational security requirements with educational opportunities, acknowledging that specialized personnel operated throughout the military system with capabilities that might not be immediately apparent. Thorne's hyperextended elbow had regained full mobility, though the joint manipulation Raven had performed left him with permanent awareness of how easily trained personnel could disable opponents through precise application of anatomical knowledge. His physical therapy sessions had provided constant reminders of techniques that existed far beyond standard military combat training. The incident had transformed institutional culture in ways that formal training programs had never achieved, creating lasting awareness about the importance of treating all personnel with appropriate respect and recognition that appearances could be fatally deceiving when encountering individuals whose service records included classified operations and specialized training backgrounds. Lieutenant Commander Hayes had incorporated the mess hall confrontation into his leadership development curriculum, using it as a comprehensive case study about harassment prevention, capability recognition, and the importance of maintaining professional behavior regardless of perceived hierarchies or demographic assumptions. The lesson resonated throughout the officer ranks as they examined their own potential blind spots. Intelligence personnel had compiled detailed documentation of the incident's timeline, witness statements, and outcomes for inclusion in training materials about special operations integration and personnel security awareness. The report would serve educational purposes at multiple installations throughout the command structure, ensuring that similar lessons could be learned without requiring direct confrontation. Medical staff had completed their analysis of the injuries sustained during the 30-second engagement, documenting the surgical precision with which force had been applied to achieve maximum educational impact while avoiding permanent damage. The techniques demonstrated suggested extensive training in human anatomy and pressure point manipulation for tactical applications in operational environments. The base's communications center continued receiving requests for information about the incident from military personnel throughout the regional command structure, all seeking to understand how one woman had neutralized 5 harassers with such casual efficiency. The story had challenged fundamental assumptions about capability and combat effectiveness that extended far beyond gender considerations. Evening briefings now included standard guidance about professional behavior and respect for all personnel, with particular emphasis on avoiding assumptions based on appearance or perceived status within military hierarchy. The policy was presented as general guidance rather than response to specific incidents, but everyone understood the connection to recent events that had transformed base culture. Raven's presence at Naval Station Meridian had evolved from anonymous cover assignment to acknowledged expertise consultation, with personnel throughout the installation now recognizing her capabilities and treating her with the deference accorded to someone whose training clearly exceeded normal military standards. Her mission had achieved its objectives while providing unexpected educational opportunities. 1 month after the mess hall incident, Raven prepared for her departure from Naval Station Meridian with the satisfaction of a mission accomplished beyond its original scope. Her evaluation of base security protocols and personnel readiness had been completed successfully, but the unexpected educational opportunity provided by the confrontation had created lasting value that would influence military culture for years to come. The 5 recruits who had initiated the encounter requested permission to formally apologize during a ceremony attended by base leadership, understanding that their public acknowledgement would serve educational purposes for future personnel assignments. Each man stood at attention as they delivered prepared statements expressing gratitude for the restraint shown and lessons learned about respect and professional behavior. Kellerman stepped forward first, his posture reflecting the humility that had replaced his earlier arrogance. "Ma'am," he said with obvious sincerity, "you chose to educate rather than eliminate when we gave you every justification for ending our careers and possibly our lives. The lesson about assumptions and respect will guide our behavior throughout our remaining military service. Thank you for your restraint and professionalism." Captain Harrison presented Raven with a letter of commendation recognizing her exceptional conduct during the incident and her contribution to base culture improvement through professional example. The document would become part of her service record, though it could never fully capture the impact of 30 seconds that had transformed an entire installation's approach to harassment and capability recognition. Barnes followed with his own apology, his healed nose serving as a permanent reminder of the concrete floor encounter that had shattered his assumptions about capability and gender. "Ma'am, your response demonstrated precision and control that saved us from consequences we deserved. The respect you've earned extends far beyond this base, and a lesson learned will influence every interaction we have with fellow service members." Master Chief Rodriguez delivered the formal assessment of the incident's educational value, noting that harassment complaints had dropped to 0 following the mess hall confrontation and that professional behavior standards had improved dramatically throughout the installation. The demonstration had achieved more effective cultural change than years of formal training programs and administrative guidance. Vance approached with the careful movement of someone whose ribs had healed but whose memory of precision targeting remained vivid. "Ma'am," he said with genuine respect, "you could have permanently disabled any of us within that 30-second window, but instead chose techniques that would teach without destroying. Your judgment under pressure represents the highest standards of military professionalism and restraint. The ceremony concluded with Admiral Blackstone's video message praising the incident's outcome and announcing that the lessons learned at Naval Station Meridian would be incorporated into harassment prevention and capability recognition training programs throughout the regional command structure. The 30-second confrontation had achieved legendary status as an educational case study. Thorne delivered the final apology on behalf of his team, his hyperextended elbow fully healed, but his understanding of joint manipulation techniques permanently expanded. "Ma'am, we approached you with assumptions based on appearance that proved catastrophically incorrect. Your response demonstrated capabilities we'd never imagined while showing restraint that preserved our futures. We'll carry this lesson for the remainder of our careers." The mess hall itself had been designated an informal memorial to the importance of professional behavior and respect for all personnel, with Table 7 serving as a reminder that appearances could be fatally deceiving when encountering individuals whose training exceeded normal military standards. The site had become a pilgrimage destination for visiting personnel seeking to understand the incident's significance. Security footage from the confrontation had been edited into training materials used throughout the military system, providing visual demonstration of harassment consequences while protecting the identities of those involved. The educational value extended far beyond the immediate participants to influence culture change at installations worldwide. Before we conclude this story, if you connected with Raven's demonstration of hidden strength, drop a comment about what resonated most with you, or share if you've witnessed similar courage when someone was underestimated in real life. Raven's departure ceremony drew attendance from throughout the base, with personnel gathering to show respect for someone whose month-long assignment had created lasting institutional change. Her presence had transformed not only the 5 men who confronted her, but the entire culture of professional interaction and mutual respect among military personnel. The base's training department had compiled comprehensive documentation of the incident's timeline, techniques demonstrated, and cultural impact for inclusion in leadership development curricula throughout the military system. The case study would serve educational purposes at installations worldwide, ensuring that similar lessons could be learned without requiring direct confrontation. Lieutenant Commander Hayes had received requests from military academies worldwide seeking permission to use the incident as a teaching example in their harassment prevention and capability recognition programs. The story had captured imaginations while challenging fundamental assumptions about strength, training, and combat effectiveness that transcended gender considerations. As Raven collected her gear and prepared for reassignment to her next mission, she reflected on the unexpected educational opportunity that had emerged from what should have been routine evaluation work. The 30-second confrontation had achieved more effective culture change than years of formal training programs, creating lasting awareness about respect and professional behavior. The 5 recruits stood at attention as her vehicle departed the base, each man carrying physical and psychological reminders of the lesson learned about assumptions and capability. Their transformation from harassers to respectful colleagues represented the kind of institutional change that rippled throughout military culture with lasting impact. Naval Station Meridian had been permanently transformed by 30 seconds of explosive education, creating a legacy of professional respect and capability recognition that would influence military culture for generations. The mess hall incident had achieved legendary status as proof that appearances could be fatally deceiving and that respect for all personnel was not optional, but essential for military effectiveness and unit cohesion.